Carmen, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited to hear your story. You work with horses, and I think most girls love horses. It's like their thing. And there's a reason for that. So I'm going to let you speak about that because obviously you're the expert. And you've also had a few spiritual awakenings and NDE and stuff. So I would just like to dig in if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
having me.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What led you on this path to working with horses? And I'll ask you about the NDE later, unless
Sure.
they're joined.
They are actually very joined.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I'll start at the beginning and see where we end up. How's that? Okay, so my name is Carmen Theobald. I grew up in Montreal, Quebec. My pronouns are she, her, and I grew up in a home that there was a lot of difficulty. There was a lot of emotional, um, mental, psychological abuse, that kind of thing. And there's also a lot of wonderful parts, as I'm sure people who've grown up in homes like that can relate to. It's very complicated, but it was also very difficult. And what that led to was me choosing to study social services at Dawson College in Montreal. And that was really an exceptional learning for me because I was learning a lot about what it meant to be both in healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships. And it was helping me articulate what was going on in my upbringing in my house. And it was starting to really validate with language what I had always kind of known to be true inside. I expected myself to go through schooling in this very methodical way. There was, being a person of the world growing up in this kind of environment where, of course, I wanted to meet the expectations and standards and, all the things that were important to me. And I really value education. But then something massively changed and put me on a completely different trajectory. And this is where all of these stories kind of intersect, where there was something that happened while I was at Dawson College that completely changed the rest of my life. It also is what opened the door to horses becoming my whole life. So, for this part of the story, this chapter, I just also want to offer a little activation warning for listeners because sometimes this can be a little bit difficult to hear. I won't go into too much detail, but it is important to share. So while I was at Dawson College, I ended up being there during this wonderful 6 hour long class that was extraordinarily precisely timed. And I'm saying that because we always went to lunch at the exact same time, and we always finished lunch at the exact same time from 12 to 1, except for this day. This day it was different. We voted as a class to stick around a little longer to let one more presentation run through, and it was that decision that I'm quite sure saved my life. Because as we would have been going to lunch at the precise time that that class always had every other day, a school shooting was beginning to unfold. And when I was starting to walk out into the hallway after this extra time in the classroom, my stomach was rumbling and I'm heading down the hallway thinking about what I'm going to eat for lunch. And I'm hearing all these noises and screams that I wasn't really able to make sense of. And time seemed to really slow down. And what happened was that this shooter was getting closer and closer to where we were. Of course, there was panic rising. My classmates and I, we ran back into our class. We hid under our desks for 45 minutes with the lights off and listening to the shooter getting closer to where we were, coming through to the classrooms that were in that area. So for 45 minutes, we hid there. And to all of our enormous relief, a group of police officers snuck into our class and silently escorted us to a position of safety. And when I got outside and I felt the sunshine on my face, I took a deep breath and realized that I was alive. And moments before, I really thought I wasn't going to be. So, although this was very intense and traumatic and scary, it also opened the door to something inside me during that moment that opened the door to everything else that was to unfold in my life.
Yeah.
But I think what's important to share in this part of the story is that when I was in the class, I could feel my fear escalating. I could feel the panic escalating. And then I had this moment where it was almost like some kind of divine intervention, some kind of spiritual awakening that took place where suddenly I wasn't afraid anymore. And it's like I had a fork in the road and I could have kept going down the path of fear and panic and disconnecting from my spirit, disconnecting from my heart, just feeling completely protective of this life, which I still wanted. It's not as though that stopped, but I shifted gears into this mode of being that was like just truly surrendering to that moment, not preparing to act. I was still very present in my body. I could take action. I had a plan of action. I still wanted to live. And I also felt this deep peace and calm that if today was going to be my last day, that was okay. And I could live with that and know that I would die with dignity and integrity and this knowing that it wasn't going to be a bad thing. But then I didn't die. And then I was alive. And all of a sudden, all of the doubts and fears and expectations and pressures that life had been holding me hostage with, suddenly the volume dial on that was really turned down. It's not like they'd completely disappeared, but they just weren't as loud because now there was this other inner voice that was a lot louder that had always been there, but was like muted. It was muffled. And now it was so much louder and so much brighter and so much more spacious. And it was just so much more important to keep doing the work to turn up the volume on that voice because I was alive. So if I was going to be living here, then I might as well live with a lot of courage. Because if I'm prepared to die with courage, then living with a lot of courage seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that's what led me to horses. So I can pause there and keep going, but I just wanted to kind of check in and see if
Well,
you wanted to talk about
I
anything.
just say that I think, when people experience trauma, they don't see the gift at the time. But in hindsight, people that I've spoken, and so many people that I've interviewed have said it's the best thing that ever happened for them because it kind of brings you to a point where you realize what actually is important. We tend to worry about the small things in life and sweating the small stuff when that stuff just consumes you and it's so irrelevant in the scheme of life. Yeah. So, but I think 45 minutes is a long time to be in that space. It's like, even people that are held up for a few minutes, it feels like hours. So, yeah, that's a long time. Okay.
Hmm.
So, how did you get to the horses?
Yeah. So I realized, perhaps not so surprisingly to listeners, that after this experience, I didn't want to be in school anymore. But ironically, it wasn't actually about the shooting. I felt that there had been this voice inside that was telling me I didn't want to be in school anymore for a while. And I was finally courageous enough to listen to it. And I really needed to leave my family home. I really needed to have an experience that was closer to nature. And I found a way to do that very cheaply. And that was to become a volunteer on a farm in exchange for room and board. And I ended up going to this farm that had vegetable gardens and maple syrup production. And the real reason I went, which was 24 horses. And I got on a bus and I left Montreal and I started my new life of what I had no idea was really going to be. I thought it was honestly going to be a temporary stop. I thought I was going to be there for a couple of weeks and then keep traveling across Canada with my then boyfriend, my now husband. And what ended up happening is 2 weeks turned into 2 years. And it opened the door to many other opportunities, one in particular, which was to work as a farrier. So a farrier is a person who takes care of horses' hooves. It's kind of like an unofficial foot doctor for horses. And by working at this particular farm for this long period of time with honestly horses that were quite challenging, quite dangerous, and the farrier knew that very well and saw me kind of go through these trials by fire with all the horses and learn really, really fast because I didn't have any other way. It's like, okay, I guess I gotta get my act together here and learn what's going on so I don't get really hurt or killed. Um, and that was also really important for me to then step into this next role of this apprenticeship. And so over the last 17 years now, I've been working with horses as a farrier. I've worked with thousands of horses in this capacity. And it's good that I started out at a farm where the horses were not very well trained or well behaved because a lot of horses that I work with as a farrier do not want to have their feet done. They don't want to have their foot lifted up by someone. Maybe the last person that worked with them was very harmful or abusive. Maybe they're in a lot of pain. Maybe they don't feel safe in their environment that they're in. Maybe I just remind them of someone that they don't like. Like there's so many reasons. Maybe our personalities clash a little bit. Like there's so many reasons why that horse and I may struggle to get their job done, get this job done of taking care of their hooves in a safe way for me and in a pleasant way for them. And so what happened over this time of working with horses so intensively is that they kept teaching me similar lessons of what I learned that day about courage and about being in alignment in my heart and my body. Because the more that I learned about what it means to be in relationship with myself, the more it was possible to be in healthy relationship with them. And as I kept having these honestly incredible teachers, these four-legged beings who were so honest, so intense, so powerful, and so gentle, and so kind, and so vulnerable all at the same time, I kept learning about healing. I kept learning about what it means to be human in a very different way. And so, this healing that was taking place relationally with myself, with them, was also spilling out into every other aspect of my life with other humans, personally, professionally. It was helping me also keep that volume dial turned up around what it means to really listen to that voice inside, the truest essence of who we are, not the doubts and pressures and expectations, but the things that are actually really important to our core, because that's all that horses are responding to. They're really just responding to what's underneath the armor, what's underneath the mask. Everything else just makes them nervous because they're like, well, now you don't really make sense because you're operating this way where you're kind of telling me one thing, but you really feel another. I don't trust that. And so learning how to be very authentically in relationship with them, in mutually respectful relationship with them, while still being able to get my job done was the most important training of my life. And it opened the door to the next stage for me, which was kind of circling me back around to people. Because honestly, when I left Montreal, I was done with humans. I was done with
Yeah.
humans from my home life. I was done with humans from the school. I was done with humans just in general. I just wanted to be far away, closer to nature, closer to animals. If humans had to be involved, okay. But like, but kind of like in a horseshoe, the horses brought me back around to the world of humans and back around to my roots in social services, which I did really love. I just needed to step away from at that time. And so I found a way to combine what I was learning with horses safely so that people don't have to go through the same kind of school of hard knocks that I've been through, and supporting people to do their own healing and growth and learning and transformation partnered with these amazing beings. So that's how I am now the founder and director of Horse Sense North. I've been doing this work for almost 10 years. We can chat more about that. But yeah, it's been a long, winding journey that got me to this place. And every single step of it has been filled with trials, but also incredible gifts.
Yeah, so you work with first responders, right?
People from all walks
Yeah.
of life, but a lot of first responders and military for sure.
How do the horses help them? Like, for people like even myself, how exactly does that work? Because if they are traumatized, do the horses feel the energy and kind of reflect it back?
So all of the above. But to break it down a little bit more, I want to start actually with a quote from this wonderful therapist. Their name is Prentice Hemphill. And they say that relational wounds require relational healing. And so much of the trauma that public safety personnel, first responders, military, but honestly, anyone is coming with, the wounding that we've experienced in life, has so much to do with relationship. And yes, the calls that people have been on, of course, if people have been in war zones, if they're, working very difficult situations as a first responder, as a public safety personnel, those are going to have a deep impact. Those are absolutely going to be at the core of someone's experience that's going to really, really shift gears potentially for their life. But what I hear more often than anything from this group of people, as well as honestly anyone I speak to, it's less about the extreme moment of that and more about how we're supported or not supported in
Yeah.
the spaces that are supposed to feel safe to recover from those experiences. And so the relational wounding that often happens is really connected to what we call sanctuary trauma or organizational trauma, where that sanctuary, if you will, that place of what's supposed to feel like home and safe and like we're protected there, actually feels different, actually feels like we're not safe there. And maybe the pain that we're coming from that is completely understandable from whatever, let's say a bad call or from some experience that we've had that was very painful or traumatizing. And then we show up with emotion about it. We show up with needs. We show up with some kind of hope to be supported, and that's dropped. Or worse, put in our face or used against us, using our vulnerabilities against us. So now, not only have we experienced these terrible things in our job, on the road, or maybe in our personal lives, but now when we come to the people or the place that we feel is that's where we're going to be able to find sanctuary, and it's the opposite, those wounds cut in many cases the deepest. I won't say every time for sure, but in many cases the deepest. On top of everything else that comes from that, there's many people who end up taking their lives because they don't have a support system or a network that they feel like they can lean into, and that on top of all of the difficult things that have happened, that they're not getting the proper support from. So I'm sharing all this first because I think it's really important to consider how the horses are doing this healing work from this relational lens as well. That when
Mm.
there's been this relational wounding of someone who's supposed to be safe and supportive and they're not, or worse, they're the opposite, it's very hard for the body to not only heal and recover from the experiences that happened, let's say at that very painful, traumatic call, but also how do we possibly lean into safety with another being, period? Not just how do we heal the wounds of that moment, but how do we learn how to be in relationship again? And how do we learn how to be in relationship with ourselves? Because so much of this is about how do we be in our body when our body feels like it's always in hypervigilance mode, when our body feels like it's constantly not safe, when it's always tense and constricted and contracted and bracing against whatever's coming next. Because whatever's coming next in life, whether it's that difficult call or whether it's the toxic environment that we're trying to operate in that's supposed to be the safe place, there's this constant protecting that's going on in the body. So the horses help in two major ways. The horses help us learn that, first of all, with just awareness, it's like starting to get some clarity about what's going on in our body, because they're going to respond when our body's constricting, when our body's contracting in that protection mode. And they're not going to respond with judgment, but they are going to respond authentically. And they're going to perhaps reflect a little bit of that back to us of like, oh, maybe I'm not going to come so close to you if you're trying to mask and pretend like everything is fine, but really your body's kind of on fire. They're going to respond to the fact that not only is your body on fire or really feeling anxious or stressed or whatever that angry, whatever that emotion might be, that physical feeling might be, they're responding to that on top of the extra layer of pretending. Because that extra layer of masking, putting the armor on, I'm fine, I've got this. The horses are like, ooh, that part actually makes me nervous, like I was mentioning before. So
Yeah.
they're very truthfully offering this if biofeedback, if you will. It's almost like they're reading our body, they're reading our energy, but never with judgment. Because the second that we shift gears into a more authentic space, and really the authenticity is such a big piece because they don't expect us to be perfect and have no feelings. They don't need us to have no feelings. In fact, they're they operate so much in the land of feelings. That makes sense to them, but then we can just be who we are. And from that place of just being who we are, they're like, oh, well, now you make sense to me. So right away, step one is there of like, now you make sense. And from this place of making sense, perhaps there's some support that they actually offer. I've seen horses where someone is feeling really depleted or anxious or even angry, and the horse provides remarkable emotional support. And so now we're starting to get really into that relationship piece as well. How are we creating some healing in relationship where a person is learning that when they are in that state, that the response is not that they're undeserving of connection. It's that they're allowed to be vulnerable and feel exactly how they're feeling. The other piece is that sometimes the horses are like, okay, well, yeah, thank you for being real of what you're feeling. And now it's time to step up your game into how do we shift gears? So they invite us to shift gears in our body of like making space for this acceptance of how we're feeling and what are we going to do about it? Not because it's wrong to feel that way, but so that we don't feel like we have to be stuck there. We're not stuck in that feeling. And so they teach us so much about how to regulate our nervous system, how to create more sense of calm and peace and ease and safety in our body. They mirror that to us. They show us examples of that. And they also give us, again, that real time biofeedback, that very positive reinforcement that as soon as we shift more and more into that place of calm and presence and authentically being together, that's where the magic really unfolds, where the horse just almost like sees directly into our soul, directly into our heart, that is deeply felt by the person. There's this experience of being more seen and heard and validated than maybe they've ever experienced ever in their life before, because the horses are just so present and so right there with who they are themselves.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a long-winded way to say that I just never come across better teachers.
It's not long-winded because, it's really getting it and understanding how it all works.
Yeah.
Because it's easy for someone to say, well, work with horses, but what does that mean?
Just being
Yeah.
near horses is also very therapeutic and beneficial. But there is a very, like, so people might hear about many different kinds of horse work that are out there. They're like distant cousins of each other. They're related, but they are very different. If you want to just go and sit and watch horses, there's actual physiological benefit of that. So just being in their vicinity has an impact on our body in a positive way. However, the relational healing pieces I'm talking about really come to pass when we're working with horses um, that really want to be our partners and are actually engaging with us in this mutually respectful relationship, also having done enough safety and healing work themselves to be healthy partners for us in our healing work. So I'm not just working with a random horse that has never been, exposed to this kind of healing for themselves, never mind another person. So it's really important that we also empower our own horses to have their own voice, their own choice, and feel very safe in the work so that it doesn't become this escalation with the person being stressed, the horse being more stressed, and then it just becomes worse and worse and potentially very unsafe. I think horses have a very strong intuitive knowing. They have a very strong spiritual connection. So a lot of horses are kind of naturally geared to this work, but not every horse is, just like not every person wants to be a therapist. And just because someone has their degree as a therapist doesn't mean they're a good one, because they have to have done enough of their own personal work to be able to show up in a session very well. And the same thing is true with horses.
Yeah. Yeah. My son was saying the other day that they say that a dog is a man's best friend. He said, no, it's horses. It's the horses that go into battle and they die with the soldiers on. It's not the dogs. And I thought that was quite observant of him to say that, because most people don't think like that. It's a
Absolutely.
partnership.
Yeah. And I think that partnership, it's important to be mentioning that piece around war, that we've had this evolution with horses for thousands and thousands of years, but it's only in more recent history that they've really been this vehicle of kind of colonization of the world through battle, through war, this and that. But what indigenous communities worldwide have known for time immemorial is that they are truly spiritual guides and teachers and emotional guides and teachers and healers. And so this partnership, this evolution with horses goes back who knows how long, where they're not just to perform a duty with us in that kind of partnership, but I think we're kind of coming back around to some of that more ancient knowledge of them, of really seeing them as how do we evolve more as humans because of their teachings, not what are we asking of them to do for us, but what are we doing for them as far as how can we show up as a better human to be in healthy relationship with them. And I really believe that that kind of evolution for our human species is needed now more than ever before.
I think absolutely. And that counts for nature. That counts for taking care of the earth and not destroying everything that humans come across, which fortunately a lot of people are still doing.
That's right.
Did you ever see that clip of that the horse outside the in Buckingham Palace?
Yeah.
And that horse bites everybody that comes near it, except when there's somebody who's got a real genuine heart. There's a lady who comes and puts her hand on the horse, and this horse totally leans in. And it's so amazing to watch because they immediately sense they'll either bite your shoulder or your hair or your handbag or something, or they will allow it. And people are mesmerized by that. But yeah, they pick up on it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a perfect example to kind of illustrate the core essence of what we do with our horses here, except for the fact that our horses don't do the biting, in large part because we're always at liberty. So if the horses don't want to be touched or don't want to be engaged with a certain way because maybe we're coming not with that like open heart, we're not coming in our most authentic place, the horses have lots of space to just walk away or tell us in a more subtle fashion, like, no, I don't like that because we've done a lot of work together. So, as long as people know that they're not going to be coming and getting bitten. However, if we continue to repeatedly ignore what a horse is telling us, then absolutely there's a risk factor there. That's part of why I'm there to make sure people don't just keep ignoring what the horse is saying. But I think that's so true with horses, with humans, with all beings. There's all of these subtle forms of communicating that happen before the retaliation, let's say, before the more aggressive response. And I'll put aggressive in quotes because how far can you really push someone and cross their boundaries before there's some kind of response back? So all these other experiences where the other people are going to touch that horse, like you're talking about in those clips, I guarantee there were many forms of communication the horse was using to say, don't come closer. I don't want you near me. And people ignore it and they're not aware. They're not aware of themselves. They're not aware of the other beings. We're kind of walking blind so often. But the ones who are really listening, then of course the horse is like open to that. And the ones who are really listening are also knowing that it's okay to be close to the horse because they're really present in that moment. And the horse agrees because it's really this dance of being in relationship together in this very authentic space. So whether we're with a horse or a dog or a person or a cat or a tree even, how, some forms are more subtle than others, but what are the ways that we're listening to each other and what are the ways that we're just kind of la 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 going through life in this way, and then we get so shocked and surprised when there's a reaction or a response. So again, another way that horses can really kind of wake us up a little bit, really like waking us up to what it means to be alive and be part of nature.
It reminds me, I went to a summer camp. Yeah, I was young, and they had all the young kids, and there was a girl in this group who was just a show off and a big mouth, and no one liked her because she carried on and on. And then we went horse riding, and the horse threw her off, and she broke her leg. And I was actually secretly quite chuffed about that because they say pride comes before a fall. But everyone was relieved because it just stopped her from boasting about how amazing she was. It just classic.
Yeah, the horses will keep us humble every time.
Yeah. Like you think you know better. Here you go.
Yeah, yeah.
That is beautiful. So how long would they need to work with a horse before? I mean, obviously it would be great to just stay like that, but I mean, how long do they go in an event like this? If they've got some kind of trauma, is it a week? Is it a day? Is it an hour?
So it really depends on what's going on for the person and what the potential barriers are. I think a lot of people would love to come back for weekly sessions or, be here for a full week program or even longer. We do have some full week programs. We do have some options for retreats and this and that. However, even people who come for like a 2 hour session, a single 2 hour session, I hear from them years later saying how impactful that was and still is. They're
Mm,
still feeling the effects of that and that there was still transformation that happened in a single session. So, because it's such experiential learning and because there's such true, deep transformations that really happen inside at a cellular level, at a spiritual level, in these kinds of moments with the horses, um, I never want to make it seem like one experience isn't going to offer something of value. And there's progressive learning that can take place. And when we have opportunities for that progressive learning, even better. Because just like posture, we need to be able to continue to practice it. We can have great posture for a second and then start to slump again.
yeah.
And we can develop muscles to support really good posture, or we can let those muscles atrophy. And so it's a daily practice. It's a daily practice of supporting healthy posture. So if we translate that into our emotional world, our physical world, our mental world, our emotional, everything world, spiritual, all of the ones, I don't even know what I said, but all of the parts of who we are, that posture is the same thing. How are we doing a daily practice to be in alignment with who we are? And having a very powerful experience like a session with the horse, whether it's a day or a week or a regular occurrence, it's just part of our kind of going to the gym to learn how to have better posture. So if we go to the gym to have a really important training session to learn about how to recognize when our certain muscles are activated, how to recognize what is good posture, what isn't, how to be very clear about that, how to get really connected with our body, how to move with more courage so that it can really like open up and allow more expansiveness in who we are. Even if that's an hour or two of like intensive training at the gym, we're going to remember that. So as we're going for a walk, as we're, picking up a box, as we're doing whatever physical things with our body, we're going to have little bits of pieces of those seeds that have been planted that will continue to grow, continue to strengthen our posture day after day after day. The same is true with the horse experiences. How are we taking what we've learned to create better emotional alignment, spiritual alignment, physical alignment, mental alignment, so that we can day after day after day remember that as we are engaging in a moment with ourselves, as we're engaging in relationship with another. Having those experiences with the horses is like going to the gym for these other parts of our life.
Yeah. And then do the horses choose you or, uh, yeah?
Yes, exactly. So we have a herd here, and often we'll have people come to the farm and say, "Oh, I really love that horse. I want to work with that horse." They'll be watching them over the fence or something like that to start. And I'll say, maybe we'll see who they pick because it's always up to the horses. They are the volunteers. We never say, you must work with this person because we're really trusting that the horses have this deep knowing not only of themselves, if they have energy that day, if they're feeling ready and able and capable of doing this kind of work, but also that there's a deep knowing of what they're supposed to be teaching us, what they're supposed to be helping a person with, even before they're in the session with them. And it's wild to see how they actually engage with each other, like the herd to almost talking to each other of like, who's it going to be today? And sometimes with particular clients, there's like a little bit of like a couple of horses might both want to volunteer, and then they kind of look at each other, and then one usually steps forward, making it obvious that, oh, I'm actually better suited. Or maybe there's a day where the herd seems a little bit more tired and they kind of look at each other and then someone volunteers, okay, I've got this. I actually have what it takes today. I can do this. And so it's amazing to see how they really work together and always show us with very clear signals, whether it's walking up to us, whether it's kind of showing us a subtle sign. But as we go to bring the halter over, for example, they'll make it clear of like, yes, I want to come or no, I don't want to. So we're always allowing them to have their voice, have consent, and really be very much part of the experience so that when we have a horse who joins us in the arena, We're never worried that we're forcing them to do this work. However they show up in there, even if it's in a way where maybe they're expressing like a very tired expression, or maybe they're showing that they don't want to be near the client, it's not because they don't want to be working. It's because they're reflecting something important to learn. And so we can really trust that whatever their body language is, whatever is going on, it's not because they don't want to be there. It's really because they have something very important to teach us. And we can really pull from that with trust so that the most transformative experience can happen.
Yeah. It's like the cat distribution system.
Yes, that's exactly what it's like.
So, okay, so somebody would come, let's say it's somebody who's maybe an ambulance worker or they've experienced they've seen some things. They would come in, they would work with a horse for an hour or two. Would that be then their support system that they don't need to feel? Because I know a lot of them, they say, even if I shared it with my partner, I don't want to give it to them. I don't want them to have the images that I've seen. It's not about signing an NDA. It's like, if I can't carry this, why would I give it to you? Does the horse take that, or does it just allow them that space? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do. Yeah, it's a great question. So I think all of the above in a sense. So, first of all, one of the things we make very clear when people are coming, whether it's for a program or for a session, there's no trauma talk. So we're not asking people to share the gruesome stories. In fact, we're asking them not to for a couple of reasons. One, we know that that can actually do harm to other people in the group, of course, to the providers as well, because it is traumatic to go through those recountings, especially over and over again. But not only is it protecting the other's well-being, it's protecting the person who's sharing the story. So
Yeah.
there is a need and a time and a place for some people to share that story, and that's wonderful. And there's ways to do that that are healthy and safe. And there's also a lot of research now to support that going too deeply into the story and revisiting that depth of trauma, it's actually re-traumatizing for the
Yeah.
person who's telling it.
Yeah.
And so we can actually learn how to heal and recover from that trauma from the body experience without going into the head and going back into that moment. So that's a big piece of what it is to work with the horses. It's so in the body. It's so about what's happening for us physically. And so as things come up, whether it's connected to that story or not, it's really back to that piece around our body has built muscle for protection. Our body has built muscle to kind of constrict and brace against what's coming next in life. So if we address what's happening physically in this very compassionate, patient, invitational way to say, okay, we're not going to suppress what's happening. We're not going to just mask it, but we're going to allow it to be there and then learn how to move through it to get to a calmer, healthier state in our body so that we can actually feel better. That's where the healing can occur and where we actually start to make changes in our brain. We start to make changes in our body so that we're shifting gears, literally, so that we have more and more access to feeling the way that we want to feel, not
Yeah.
by suppressing how we're feeling, but just by acknowledging it and learning how to move through. And that doesn't require the story. So, all that said, sometimes someone has something that they want to be telling the horse because it's very relevant and it's very timely and it feels like the right moment and it's safe and they can talk to the horse. Of course, they can talk to the horse. And the horse is a being that doesn't carry it the same way as humans. And the horses actually want to help, not by just being a therapist listening to the story, because then you're like, well, you're actually not in your body. You're not present with me anymore.
Yeah.
Which is often kind of sometimes what happens. People, they go in and say, oh, well, I'm going to tell the horse a story. I'm like, okay, see how that goes. And sometimes people talk to the horse in a way that's staying very present. And that's wonderful because then it's this like authentic relational healing and sharing. But sometimes they go and then they go into their head and they're not in the present moment anymore because they've gone into a different time zone in their head. And the
Yeah.
horse responds to that. And they are going, why doesn't the horse want to hear? It's like, well, you've lost connection with the present. You've lost connection with who you're talking with.
Yeah.
And so they invite the person to come back again into their body, into this moment of authenticity together, which often doesn't have a lot to do with words.
No.
So all to say, if there is a sharing that happens with the horse in a way that is good for the horse and the person, I'm not worried about the horse's well-being for a few reasons. One, they go and they have a wonderful way of literally shaking it off. I see them do these physical moves that they run, they buck, they roll around. They're literally kind of moving the energy. They help move the energy. They even like notice on people's bodies where there's stuck points. They will put their noses on places on a person's body that they've had, some chronic injury or where they're holding an emotional wound. And it's amazing to see how the horses are literally energy workers during these sessions, even if we're not calling it that. That's absolutely what's happening. And we also support the horses in a lot of ways. So we do our own energy healing work with them. We have a lot of body workers and support people to make sure that everything is being cleared for them and they're getting support with that too, whether people are telling the story or not. And that's the thing. It's not about the story. It's that they're really working with our energy, helping us get unstuck. And then we have this reciprocal relationship with them where we help them get unstuck too.
Yeah, that is amazing. I think they can sense where it all is. I know they use horses for hospitals as well and old age homes, retirement homes.
Yeah,
And there's just something magical about them. It's not like yes, a dog is different. They're loyal, cats are different, but horses have just carried this other kind of energy and they don't forget. If somebody injured them 30 years ago, they will remember.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They've done some really neat studies around that too to show how horses' memories are comparable to elephants. Like they have excellent awareness. And I'm not going to have I'm going to have bad attribution to this one study, but I think it was connected to the University of Guelph, but I could be wrong on this. But they did a really interesting study where they looked at two groups of horses and they taught them things when they were very young. And one group, they taught them things with positive reinforcement. So they would just kind of ignore the things that they didn't want them to learn and just reward the things that they were like, yes, that's what we're looking for. And the other group, they taught them things with negative reinforcement. So it wasn't necessarily like harmful, punishing, abusive behavior physically, but they would correct them and they would kind of tell them no and, really kind of get after them a little bit when they were doing it, quote, wrong. And they both had these groups of horses attain the outcomes, achieve what they were trying to learn. And I'll put achieve in quotes, right? They could do the tasks on cue. And then they didn't have those cues with those horses for 10 years. Those two groups of horses, they did not do any of that for 10 years. And then they brought those two groups of horses back in and redid the cues to see where things were at. The group of horses that were trained with negative reinforcement, correcting, it's as if they started from scratch. It seemed like they remembered nothing. It seemed as if their memory wasn't very good. The other group who was trained with positive reinforcement, it's like they did everything yesterday. They knew it perfectly. And so the question is not, were they able to learn and remember with the one group that was trained with positive or negative reinforcement, rather? It's that they're just remembering and learning something else. They're remembering and learning to protect themselves. They're remembering and learning how to stay safe in a moment that actually doesn't feel safe. So the tasks of what the humans are trying to get them to learn are way less important than the things that they're learning around safety. And so
Yeah.
that's why they don't remember the tasks because they're just remembering how to stay safe, even if it's not an overtly abusive dynamic. So if I could pull that into our human world,
Yeah.
what could that mean for us? How could we start to really support ourselves to grow and learn and transform and expand into the versions of our healed selves that we really want to be with this kind of kindness, with this kind of positive reinforcement, with this kind of awareness that we're always learning something. It's just, what are we learning?
Yeah. And I mean, even it's just the words we use. I know with my daughter that when I was learning how to be positive parenting, and I said to her, if you get in the bath now, we'll have time for a story. Is the same thing as saying, if you don't bath, we won't have time. But I can tell you, the one way got way better results. No crying, none of that. It's just excitement, and there's more bonding. So, yeah, humans, you know what? I think there's a lot more to learn that people just don't know, and this is just the beginning. But I'm so glad that it's happening because there is a need. I mean, where do these people go? And where does anybody go? Because let's face it, even if you had a place where you could feel safe and supported, they're not trained in that. People aren't trained in how do you support somebody that got their own issues that they don't even know how to cope with, on top of everything else. So it's like you say, it's not about dumping your baggage on them at all. You know, they wouldn't take it. They just say, oh, you're dumping, I'm leaving, go for
Exactly.
a walk.
Exactly.
You finish dumping, I'll come back and check in.
That's right. That's right. It's
Oh,
because
that's
there's
beautiful.
dumping and then there's connecting, right? And what is
That's it.
connecting? We heal through
Yeah,
connection. And
that's
that
it.
sometimes involves story, sometimes it doesn't. But that's real, authentic connecting. And I think that takes courage because that means that we're leaning in a way that is taking the armor off. And this is where I love how horses can also bridge a lot of the gender pieces that can sometimes be there with horses, where in the riding and show world, it is very heavily gendered, mostly girls and women doing that kind of sport, if you will, until the higher levels. And then all of a sudden there's men. And it's like, where'd you come from? Um, but, uh,
Yeah.
but as far as the like healing aspects of working with horses, I really, really appreciate how they can absolutely bridge that gap of for people of all genders to feel like there's a space where accessing vulnerability is not only okay and welcome, but it actually feels really possible
Hmm.
because we're not dropping the strength, we're not dropping the power. Horses represent this paradox of strength and vulnerability, of power and gentleness. And I think, especially for a lot of men of the world, where there's such a pressure to be in that very strong role, to discount the emotional pieces because it becomes too vulnerable. It's as if we have to sacrifice one for the other. And in a lot of systems, that's actually true. There's so much harm in that. And
Yeah.
so to say, oh, well, let's just come together and heal and be vulnerable. And, like that's going to sound so woo woo and ridiculous and fair enough to people, especially when they're coming from these public safety personnel backgrounds where their job requires them to have such access to strength and power for the good of the herd, as we would say, for the well being of others, to protect others, to stay safe. And horses, they are just this embodiment that both can be true. And it often opens or breaks through the barriers of people who don't want to access other kinds of support because it feels too exposed. Whereas horses, it's like, well, I get to learn just how to be with a horse. The rest, whatever. But maybe I just want to go be with a horse because the horses really draw us in. They have this energy, this feeling that they communicate even through a picture where they're strong beings. And then as we get to know them, get to know these powerful beings, that we also see just how big their hearts are, just how much vulnerability they have all the time, and how much they invite us to be in that space. And when they invite us to be with them in that space, they also don't want us to drop our own healthy power. If we go in and we're like, oh, I just want to be really soft and sweet, but I have no boundaries, then they actually don't feel safe with us either because they really want us to stand tall and stand strong in who we are. Because if there was a threat on the horizon, they want to know that we've also got their back. So they say, can you be rooted and grounded in your power, but also be very, very open in your heart to being able to connect? And I think that that paradox, having access to both, requires tremendous courage, but it's also like the key to unlocking so much of our healing, so much of our relationships, so much of our just what it means to exist in this world in a more impactful, meaningful, deeply important way so that we can actually be the change that we all need to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any stories of or like something that stands out for you that's happened with one of your people that's been to you?
Yeah. Oh, so many. I'll share one story with one of our horses. His name is Dr. Quinn. The good doctor.
Yeah.
He definitely deserves that PhD title, you know. Um, and he shows up to the ring, and as we talked about, he volunteered to come, so we knew he wanted to be there. And as soon as the person goes in to work with him, he goes to sleep. Like he closes his eyes. He was almost snoring. Like his lip is
Oh,
drooling,
wow.
like his drooping, and there's like drool coming out, like he's just checked out. Now, this person who went in with him, she was a very kind of go-getter, very active in her life, very productive, really the person people would turn to if they needed to get something done. Very strong person. And there was part of her that was being very protected by that very intense side. And that part of her that was being protected actually felt very checked out. She disclosed later how she has felt most of her life that even though she does all these things, she doesn't really feel present to her life. She feels kind of asleep to her life. And so she goes in with this horse who instantly goes to sleep. And she's looking at me going, I don't think he wants to be here. I think he just wants to be done. But thank goodness we have this way of partnering with our horses that I can confidently say, well, he chose to be here. So if we were giving the most generous assumption of what's going on here, that he really, really wants to be helping you, what could his going to sleep mean? And she said, well, maybe he's really reflecting back what I feel. I said, okay. And what would happen if you let yourself feel that way and didn't try to be something else? She said, I'm not sure. I feel like that would be really scary and like I wouldn't be safe to just feel tired. I said, okay, well, what if you just allowed yourself to feel that way for a few minutes with him? So she spent some time and just kind of landed in the truth of that moment for her. And then she looked back at him and looked back at me. Well, he's still asleep. I said, okay, so that's fine. What would it mean to wake up? What would it mean for that part of you to have the energy to come back to life? And so we had done some experiences before that to kind of help access more energy and do some grounding and do some regulation. And so she did that very intentionally. She kind of drew energy up from the ground and kind of allowed this inspiration to come from above and kind of like built this energy and this aliveness inside of herself, but not in the way that she's done in the past, where it's just been powering through and forcing it, right? Because that doesn't work. So we first had to get to that place of just allowing that to be there and then bringing it in this very invitational way. And as she did this, it was instantaneous that she had one breath, two breath, and on the third time of her bringing this in, bringing this aliveness in, it's like Dr. Quinn woke up, looked over at her, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like very alert and present now. And she starts laughing and he's licking her face and he's like all nuzzling in her neck. And they're just having this beautiful moment of deep, intimate connection where he really sees her. It's like her soul had been sleeping, her spirit had been sleeping, her heart had been kind of offline. And when she came back online in this more alive way, he's like, I'm alive with you. I see you. It's so amazing to see you. Welcome back. And they had this moment of like being rejoined in a sense of aliveness together with tears and laughter and so much energy. And she came out of that session completely revitalized. And although that's going to have to be a practice for her, just like the posture, there needed to be a moment to show her it was possible because she had been through so many years of that not being there and not having any clue, not only how to access it, but if she could access it. Because it had been so asleep, that part of her had been so asleep for so long that it seemed like that was just the way that she was going to have to live her life. So now to have this moment where suddenly it's possible, sure, it's still going to require muscle strengthening and practice to keep it going, but she knows in this very visceral, embodied, experiential way that she can access it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I just picture the drool and
Yes,
but
exactly.
yeah, I mean, it is instant. And yes, I think it's learning what the thing is, what it looks like, getting the verification in real time. Okay, that is what it looks like. I wasn't making it up. I wasn't thinking that maybe this is the way to do it. And if I don't know what it looks like and it's wrong, he would have pointed that out and
Yep.
she knew. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, that is
Exactly.
wonderful.
That
Yeah.
verification that you just mentioned, I think that's one of the most important pieces. Whether clients are telling us the whole story of that or not, but I hear pieces of this at almost every session where they have some kind of thought or there's a very subtle shift in their body that would have been so easy for them to discount,
Yeah.
and the horse responds to it instantly. So it's like, oh, that part of me actually is real. And it really does have an impact whether I'm swinging to one end of the pendulum or the other of like putting myself down or actually making space for something to shift in a good way. The horses
Yeah.
respond to every single moment of that.
Yeah. It's instant. There's no like delayed effect. Where can people get hold of you?
So if people are interested about the work that we do, you can check out our website, horsesensenorth.com, HORSESENSENORTH.com. There's a contact form there. We offer free discovery calls because although we have some programs that are public offerings and different kinds of online and in-person things, um, we also offer a lot of bespoke situations because every person and group is individual and unique. So we can always chat about what that would actually look like for people who are interested. There's also a lot of videos on there, both client testimonials as well as videos of the horses and just kind of a little bit of what we do. So if anyone's interested, I think that's the best place to start.
Lovely. I'll post all those links below. And do you have a message for our viewers? Something that they can maybe take home or start with, or if they were looking for a place nearby, what they should look for?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two parts. If you're looking for a place nearby, definitely if you don't have a lot of horse experience or any, that's fine. And and even if you do, right? Because even if you do have a lot of experience with horses, it's not necessarily going to translate into this work all the time. So what I would say is to really pay attention to the language people are using when they speak about their horses, making sure that it feels right. And that might sound kind of funny, but I think for this podcast and this conversation, it'll resonate okay.
Yeah.
To really, pay attention to what your gut feeling is saying. Because if you're getting the impression, whether it's with the human experiences or the horse parts of it, that something's just not quite there, to listen to that knowing. It is an unregulated field. And so there are some places that are doing this work that shouldn't be. Just like even in regulated fields, like we're using the example of therapists. I work with some phenomenal therapists. There's others who really maybe shouldn't be doing their job. So, and maybe it's just not the right one for you. It doesn't have to be so extreme. So just like we kind of go on a first date, and then maybe that doesn't work out, and so we keep finding the next one to go on, or the first time meeting a new therapist or a counselor or a coach, the same thing is true. See if it's a good fit for you and really listen to what that inner voice is saying. Because if something is coming up as a red flag, we want your body to be acknowledged. And then that's actually part of the healing experience, perhaps, of going, oh, this isn't right for me. I will not force myself to be somewhere that it's not right for me. And then as far as a message for people, um, I think it really comes back to courage. We live in a world that is very fractured. There is so much going on, no matter where we're living, that is painful. And there's so much wounding everywhere of the planet, of each other. And this is a time where I really believe we need more access to courage in a contagious kind of way. That even if it's in a very small moment of courage, just to know that that's not just for you, that shows up for other people. We're actually helping each other when we lean into a little bit extra hope, when we lean into a courageous act, when we lean into a courageous knowing that we're listening to. And there's a ripple effect of that. there's a ripple effect that I really believe is important for everyone on this whole planet. And so, for everyone who is practicing courage in the way that you can and expanding that a little bit here and there where you can, I really honor that. And I see you and I thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Love your message. Yeah, I'm with that. I think I'm grateful that you had a school shooting in the way that it turned out, not that it happened, but it's what can you take from it and what real good can you do with it? It's almost like paying the trauma forward in a way that benefits rather than be considering it as a victim state and locking yourself away and feeling insecure because it's an opening opportunity. It's not it's an opportunity of what you want to do with it. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Well done. And thank you for your courage. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Natasha. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.